That was very beautiful and exactly on message, as usual. Our topic today is how to reach that bold climate goal that the United Church General Council this spring gave to United Churches of Canada to reduce 80% of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And the answer is really simple. We just need to be communities working together. I guess I'm done now. Oh, no, just kidding. I'm going to really explore that concept here today. And I want to do it by telling stories and including part of my life's journey. I think stories are much more interesting to listen to. So I was very privileged to spend 4 of the first 5 years of my life on or near a mountain jungle. And the thing is, when you live in a jungle, you're very close to nature. Clouds, which are usually above us here, are sometimes below us when you're living on a mountain. And sometimes you're in a cloud. And what that means is that even as a child, it was really obvious to me that water was in a cloud and was in the air. And then when the water fell, I was able to notice that it was absorbed by the soil. And then later, the trees, which were growing in that soil, seemed to give that water back to me when I picked some palo, bananas, guayabano, or mangoes. And then I was absorbing that water. And the bits of tree that were on the ground became absorbed by that soil as well. And so I knew soil was full of life and rich. And then I realized too, even if not consciously, but subconsciously, I understood that I was part of the air and the soil and the water, and that everything was made of air and soil and water, and that we were together. Yesterday, I was listening to a webinar held by the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, and I learned about how the concept of stewardship came up, and the people who were hosting the discussion thought to ask their Indigenous communities, is stewardship a word that we should be using? And the Indigenous friend said, you know, it really implies a sense of ownership and owning. But they suggested using the word kinship instead. And this is really the truth, like the anthem that the choirs just sung, is that the earth does not belong to us, that we belong to the earth, and that we are part of the earth. And in many ways, it owns us more than we own it. We can't own it. In fact, the life on the planet is shared matter and energy that we have to use in harmony. And this is point 1. Being on or near nature is really important for understanding how it works. And another thing I learned yesterday is that if you want your children to grow up to be agents of change environmentally, apparently it works best if you give them unsupervised time in nature. Haha. They're happy to hear that. We live in a city, so it's not easy for us to spend time in and on nature. But that means we need to listen to the people who do. The gardeners, the farmers, and our Indigenous people who still live on the land or who still carry the knowledge of living on the land. And point 2 is that the air and soil on our planet and the water are used over and over again. We don't have any new stuff coming to us. It is the same stuff being recycled by ancient rhythms. And here is point 3. By the way, there's only 6 points, so I'm halfway done. We don't know everything about everything, but you each know a lot about something, and I know a lot about some things. We need to admit what we don't know, especially in a time of climate crisis. And we need to ask questions because it's going to seriously affect our future. It's time to be prepared. I became very fascinated with life and studied science, eventually becoming a science teacher in Toronto. I was really surprised one day when a coworker who was also a science teacher came up to me in the hall and said quietly, "How could you be a science teacher and a Christian?" It hadn't crossed my mind that those two things were incompatible. To me, there was no more likely place to find God than in the workings of the universe. And if that search showed me that God was not who I thought he was, or she was, then I still wanted to know. The value of this search for wisdom is echoed in Proverbs 3. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. I wish sometimes that those wealthy people in the world understood that concept. By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. And by his knowledge, the watery depths were divided and the clouds let drop the dew. And I'd read that, so I understood that, and so I kept studying. And as I studied, I learned things. I knew that the human population was very large, just crossed over 8 billion this last week. It's expected that it's going to level off at 10.4 billion around 2100. That many humans consuming what they need and a lot of what they just want from life are disturbing these ancient rhythms of cycling and recycling. And this means that some areas, because sometimes we know those facts, but we don't really understand what they mean. But if the earth can't keep these things recycled, some areas of land that grow food cannot grow food again in time for the next year's needs. People are holding matter out of the cycling opportunities and taking out the trees that do much of the work of recycling for homes or fuel. When I first heard of global warming, I have to admit I dismissed it in favor of what I thought were more important environmental issues. It was math that finally helped me understand. Now, you have to understand something, that the carbon on this planet has been here since the beginning of time. We don't get to add to it or lose it. It's the same carbon. So why are we worried about so much of it? But the thing is, centuries ago, millions of years, hundreds of millions of years ago, the earth was much warmer. And the carbon in that time was in the atmosphere. It was in gas form in the atmosphere. And it made a blanket around the earth, and the earth was warmer. And then plants evolved, and eventually they grew so big, and they changed that gas carbon in the atmosphere into solid carbon. There were so many plants, so big, there weren't any humans around cutting them down. So many plants that when they fell over, they got buried before they could be rotted. Rotting is a process of turning solid carbon into gas carbon. So when they couldn't be rotted, they stayed under the ground and they got buried. So in the earth, under way down, was solid carbon and liquid carbon that we did not have access to. All that carbon coming out of the air meant that the earth cooled down. Well, this is where the math comes in, because a few hundred years ago, humans found it again, and they started digging it up because they said, wow, this is like free fuel. We can burn it and provide energy for ourselves. When you burn solid carbon or liquid carbon, you turn it into gas carbon again. So now it's back in the atmosphere. But this is the thing we don't understand. If we turned it back to gas carbon in 1 million years, it would be slow enough that we could handle that. The plants would grow big enough to take it out, we could adapt to it. But if this sheet of paper represents 1 million, that distance, because humans are going to convert it to gas carbon in 500 years. How wide do you think 500 years compared to if this is 1 million? It's going to hurt. Well, it's okay because you can't tell that I didn't pull one out. I need all my hairs. Okay, so it's the thickness of a human hair. It's such a tiny time compared to what 1 million years is like. And that's the problem. We're going to do it too fast that we won't be able to adapt. When I understood that, I really started to get why the climate crisis is a crisis, because we're dumping that carbon back into the atmosphere as gas carbon. And you know, the United Church of Canada gets it too. And that's why this spring they made this ambitious climate target, 80% reduction of emissions by 2030. To many, it seems too much. But to me, it seems barely enough because I have been immersed in the data. To many, it seems impossible, but to me, it seems possible because I've been listening to those same people who are telling us the bad news, who are also saying that it is still possible to do something about it. And so we are living in this really great time because we're in a place where we still have an opportunity to do something about it. We have despair, but we also have hope. And that's why we're holding this climate service today, to come to understand what we can do to reduce emissions by that amount in the time frame that we're given. So here are some things we need to understand. The climate is going to warm more than we will want to live with. Some parts of the earth are going to be too hot to live in unless you're really rich and you can afford the energy to cool your homes and your cars. So millions of people are going to need to move because the areas where they are going to have a climate that's too hot. Some areas are going to run out of groundwater, partly because the hot air is going to evaporate the water away, partly because there are too many people using it, but also because the glaciers that fed that groundwater are melting and running into the ocean. And they will not remake themselves the next winter. And millions of people are going to need to move. And then the Arctic and Antarctic and Greenland ice caps are going to melt, and the seas are going to rise. And frequently, they're going to wash away the shores and the homes of people living near the shores. And millions of people will need to move. And dry forests will catch fire, and atmospheric rivers will drown cities, and hurricane winds will batter homes and floods and do what they did in Pakistan. And millions of people will have to move. And even if we cruelly shut down our borders and selfishly hoard our stuff, even though we're the ones burning most of the carbon, trouble will come to us anyways because of point 4. Finally got to it. We are not only environmentally linked on this planet, but we are also economically and socially linked on this planet. One planet, one people. And if millions of people are needing to move, we're going to have to cope with that issue. And it's our responsibility too. But this is the cool thing. And I go back to Proverbs, talking about the value of understanding. This is what it gives you. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. My people, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. And then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. And this is point 5. The answers are there because the same people studying what's going to happen with the climate crisis have also studied the best way to fix it. In fact, the answers have been there for a long time. We just needed to listen to them. And it turns out that a community-minded church like ours is an ideal part of the solution. And that's why we needed this climate service. The IPCC tells us that solutions will come from local, community-based, information sharing, resource sharing networks. Doesn't that sound like a church? So here is point 6. Ooh, last point already. And it's the biggest, most important point of this message. The one thing I'm going to ask you to do before you leave today is really easy and won't cost you anything, and yet is so critical to making this work. You must talk about the climate crisis. Right now, decide to do that one thing. You're going to talk about the reality of the climate crisis. You don't have to have answers. I'm not asking you to be experts. You just have to start this conversation wherever you go. Remember, those of us my age, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I would like to start a new one, WAYDAC. What are you doing about climate? And I don't want us to say that aggressively. It's not like, what are you doing about climate? It's different. It's like a conversation. So what are you doing about the climate crisis? This is how we become part of changing the values of a planet. Talking about acting on the climate crisis normalizes that behavior and makes everyone much more likely to make the lifestyle changes we need. Here's what talking looks like. Have a family meeting. Make some decisions about what you plan to do in the near future. And Key part here, share the burden of research with other people. Someone in your family or your friends can find out about the best electric vehicles to buy and share that information with the group. Someone can find out about installing heat pumps instead of furnaces. Someone can share insights on how to use furnaces less at home. Because furnaces are where we're burning that carbon and turning it back into gas form. Maybe about retrofitting. Someone can find out about eating delicious vegan recipes. Someone can find out about the amazing opportunity of investing your money in solar panels, which is something that Richmond Hill is actually trying to get people to do right now. Trust me, I've just been looking at the return on solar panels, and it's better than the return from any bank. So I'm really considering renting my sister's roof, because I can't use my roof, it has trees all around it. And I'm putting solar panels on the roof, but then getting the income back from the sale of the energy. So, because it's gonna be fantastic. Plus, the only problem is, if we have solar panels, if you have solar panels on your roof and there's an ice storm and electricity cuts out, you're gonna be fine because your solar panels will generate your energy. She lives a long way from me, I'm gonna have to move to her house. Okay. So it helps make our cities more resilient, which is why Richmond Hill is really asking us to do this, to make these investments. Diane and I researched recently window replacements in Richmond Hill, which is so much easier than doing it alone. And we can tell you what we found out if you need to replace your windows. Community network means that we're sharing the load of all this information gathering and finding the experts. But don't just talk with family and friends, bring it up wherever you go. So I went to see a chiropodist just a few weeks ago. And I mentioned that I was doing work on the climate crisis since I was retired. And she didn't know anything about it, but she was really concerned about it. She didn't know what it was because she said, something to do with pollution, right? But then she proceeded to fire question after question after question at me, even though she had another patient waiting. She kept asking me more things. I think she's likely to buy an electric vehicle just from that conversation with me and look at putting solar panels on her home. Because we're at a wonderful time right now, what the IPCC calls a brief and rapidly closing window. This is the time when almost all the people around us are really worried about the climate crisis. They want the information, they don't know what to do. There's going to come a time by probably around 2030 when it will be too late to stop the worst situations of the climate crisis. That's why that deadline is set. But now is the time to start talking and sharing our information so we can start working to fix the problem. So one option you have for learning more is tomorrow night, because the Shining Waters Presbytery, which is our regional group of United Churches, is holding the first of a series of informational meetings to help churches meet the General Council target of 80% by 2030. And the link for that meeting came in an email to you last week. Feel free to join us tomorrow night. The hair group is going to join that meeting. And the recording of that meeting, I'll try to make sure that recording is available on our site, but also it will be on the Regional Council site under Ecological Justice following the meeting. And you can listen to it later. Maybe your book club group or something can listen to that later. And the slideshow we use will be available there as well. But today, after the service, we're asking that some networking start now, here, because sometimes it's good to just do things right away. So we would like you to go to the chart papers that are around the church. There's 6 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'd like you to put your name on the ones that apply to you. And talk to the people who are there putting their names. So this is where you share, okay, I'm going to do this. Can you help me do this? Have you ever done that before? You share information. There are many people in this church who know a lot about what to do. Okay, at the very least, I'm going to ask you to write on that paper there, because that says talking about climate. And I'm asking that one thing I think we can all do. So if you can put a code name if you don't want to put your personal name. But you can just say commit to talking about climate from now on. And even when Harry will explain more about this at the end of the service. Okay, closing, I'm done. But I want to say something that Fran is going to reiterate also at the end of the service. I really believe that it is the synergistic effect of all these individuals, communities, and groups around the globe whose combined energy will make the difference and tip the scales toward reversing global warming. Evie and Harry, I'm turning it over to you.
Our community is an important resource. This is a key idea of this climate service. Today, we would like to introduce to you a few people working on climate in our community. Mary Rickard, a resident of Rosetown Apartments, would like to share her story.
Checking.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a long time since I've been in. Sorry. It's a long time since I've been in the
Church.
in a church, in the pews here. It's a long time since I've been in the pews here. But I've actually been here because I've been up on the wall. And there are lots of people also like me, not only up on the wall, but listening to the sound. And I'd really like to thank everybody, whoever you are, who brought this possibility to people like me. It's such an essential part of our lives. So thank you for sharing that. Perhaps like me, when you get old and your body starts to go, you're challenged. And I do not like my body getting old and get very frustrated that I can't do what I used to do. And I have to rely on other people to do things for me. It's really difficult. It's a challenge, as I'm sure many of you know. And often in our society, we're seen when you can't do things for ourselves, that our minds have gone as well. But I can assure you, a lot of people like me still have a good mind. And there's not much that we can do. But inspired by Esther, there are things that we can do. There are many things that we can do, and especially you folks here, you have a unique, cohesive community that supports each other, has faith, and wants to help the very place where we live, which is God's creation. This is God's house, the whole creation. It's our home, and we want to do what we can for it. And sometimes it's hard when we can't do things, thinking what you can't do. But this is something we can do. Esther has given us many examples, and even if it's just a finger, you can switch off a light. Or if you've got something else that you can switch off a light or unplug something, that would be I think that would be good to start with a kind of game that you choose which appendage is going to switch off the light. And then next week you can check with each other about what you actually did. So that we support each other on getting used to doing things. But I'm not talking about lights for safety. Like some of you here, I have to make visits to you know where in the middle of the night. And having a light really means that I don't fall and hurt myself. So there are many situations like that. So here we are. we can do something, but the thing is, we have to do it in unity. And as Esther has said, there are lots of ways we can do that. And you are set up really well to do this. And my connection with Esther has brought about a program where I live, which is Rosetown, a place to see 125 apartments. And I think I'd be right in there. Perhaps Joan will agree with me, and you up there, Stella. It's not what we would call a cohesive community. It's a large community, multicultural, multi everything, and not really community minded. So it's a challenge. So for Esther and I, it's going to be a challenge to do this. But the thing is, we need each other. This is the thing, we need each other. And my hope is that we're going to do this. Esther has been so important to all of this, and I want to say thank you to her. I don't know when we first got together, but she's certainly has got me involved in all of this. And I think that her parents named her well. If you remember the biblical story of Esther, I think she's well named. So for Rosetown, I don't think they don't all know what's going to come to them, but we can only do it together. And this is what we want, togetherness. One little thing like putting off a switch means that we can make a difference, and that's what we need now, making a difference. And we here who come into God's world, we believe in this, and we want to make a difference. We are blessed. We are blessed because we understand that the world is our home and that God has given us all these things to make our lives easier and better. And we in North America certainly have had all of those privileges in terms of the world. So now it's our turn to support each other and what we can do to sign up and to do it. And ask each other, and maybe you could ask our most too at times. Thank you.
Just before you say anything, I just want to say that Mary, the reason why we started is because she emailed me and said, can you come and tell me how to do the face for the climate? So I started it all. Yeah. It can be.
Thank you, Mary. Now we would also show how working together is important. It seems like me and Mary are not able to fix God. We would like to hear what he said again. If you would like to come up and help us.
We will now hear from Lynn May of Church Self-Audit. She, Deb Word, and David Layton Brown conducted on the invoice.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad that Esther said this doesn't rely on professionals, because David and I are certainly not professionals, but we're interested. We've been part of the Net Zero Committee for a long time. Esther pointed us to a United Church of Canada website, Footprints, that has a do-it-yourself audit of church buildings, We looked at that document. It was really well laid out, a well laid out version of an environmental audit, and it would give us a lot of really useful information about the way our building keeps and loses heat, uses electricity and water and so on. We weren't able to take on the whole package. It's quite a large job, but we did go through the building with Dan as our guide. And as you can imagine, Dan knows a lot about this building. Ian was our recorder. And we went through all the work that has been done already. For example, all the plexiglass over the leaded glass windows in many of the CD room floors has helped enormously with heat loss. We looked at the real inside storm windows in Centennial Hall, which are very energy effective. We looked at all the LED lights that have been installed in much of the CD building. We looked at the way Deb is using office machinery that shuts on when it's not being used, and it's quite effective. For the situation that we are in now as a church, with plans afoot to redevelop all but the sanctuary, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do expensive energy-wise improvements, but we can look at what David calls the low-hanging fruit. The bell tower, according to Dan, is a huge energy loss, and we have to finish the work there so that we can retain heat. There are leaky doorways everywhere, especially the Center Street door. And I remember growing up in a church downtown that had quilted doors, and it suddenly dawned on me, I'm sure why they quilted those doors. We could get Linda Lindbergh and her game to quilt our doors. The energy consumption of especially our 3 refrigerators needs to be looked at, because I don't think we're using one of them very much. This audit is a sobering process, but it's really inspiring. Not only are David and I continue on with what was started, and Dan is very keen, it's spilling over into our own lives. I have to tell you that I, as a result of that energy audit, have scheduled an energy audit of my house, and I'm finally going to get on with properly insulating my attics. My son Zachary has come home to stay for the weekend and works in BC for the government in their building codes department. And he just keeps looking at that house and saying, I know we can put a heat pump here. I'm going to find out who the right person is. So it's very inspiring. Esther is our constant inspiration. And I hope that we can all move together on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. To allow welcome my grandmother, Fran Basements, to share some words that are free to inspire.
Oh, paper. Where's the paper from here? Must be somewhere. Wait. Maybe Lynn took it. I don't think it's there. No, it's not there.
Lynn, did you pick up the paper? Yeah, Lynn has it.
So hi everybody. And Esther, you are an inspiration. Thank you. I'm going to talk about a book by Maud Barlow called Still Hopeful. And the library released it so that anybody can get a copy at any time. It's a fabulous book. So as I was reading Maud Barlow's recent book, Still Hopeful, I found myself becoming just that, hopeful. Maud is a world leader and passionate social justice advocate who has fought to preserve and protect the global water supply and make clean water free and accessible to all. She's had many reasons to be discouraged by her undesirable outcomes, but instead she's chosen to focus on the goal instead of individual outcomes in her quest for social justice. She's chosen to recognize incremental changes made as a result of advocacy that has led to substantial progress. In discussing climate change, she tells us that we must not allow ourselves to become paralyzed by a sense of hopelessness in the battle against global warming, because change is happening. It's everywhere. After trying to work directly with governments and commercial interests, Maud found that real change happens at the grassroots level, by individuals and small community groups working together to build the momentum that eventually makes governments and corporate interests take notice. So how does this change affect me? I can come to understand that as my focus is only on the outcomes of every climate goal I'm working toward, I'll quickly get discouraged because I personally cannot affect change at a governmental level. But by advocating for change within my small group, I become part of that global community, pushing for legislative change that requires a drastic decrease in carbon emissions. I also become part of the global community that is changing their behavior to reduce their personal carbon emissions. Barlow tells us that we mustn't be complacent because global warming is a threat to our survival. But the threat shouldn't be met as a challenge to act. There are millions of individuals and thousands of community groups and environmental NGOs around the globe demanding change. So, as Esther said, it's the synergistic effect of all these individuals, communities, and groups around the globe whose combined energy will make the difference and tip the scales toward reversing global warming. So especially, I'm reaching out to our young people and asking them to be still hopeful and to be an agent for change in some small way. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Now we will be singing Touch the Earth Lady, which can be found in Voices United, number 307. Evie and I are making some commitments for climate, which we will write on the chart papers around the church. After the service, there are 6 categories, and you can add to one or all of them. The categories are talking about climate, transportation, buildings, food, planting, and consumables. I am committing to having shorter shells, which I will write on consuming less.
Make it somewhere and short enough for me to bike or walk, I will bike or walk. I will be writing this under transportation, which is at the back. If you could, it would be really nice if you could write your name and what you are going to do on the chart papers around the church. When we are finished with the blessing, if you are at home, a link will pop up in the chat with a 6-page document for you to add your name to whatever you like.
If you need help with writing, Evie or I will be happy to help you, and we'll bring you a post-it note and pencil for you to write your comments. And we will add it to the chart. Sharon will join the online group and answer questions for anyone who's confused.
Now please join us in a blessing. Could you please read the bolded parts for us?
As we have heard,
You choose to hear the wind and rain.
as we have been informed,
You choose to inform others and plan with them.
as we have found support,
We go with confidence through your heart. Working towards change.
as the earth holds us.
We offer back our thanks. Amen. I just would like to say that thank you to Evie and Harry for conducting this service for us. And I have a letter of reference for each of them to add to their resume portfolios. Thank you. Please feel free to start writing on